Today we're going to talk a little bit about a niche subject, which is when you're very wealthy, how the way that you think about your wealth and what you do with it should be quite different than when you have smaller amounts of wealth. And so I've been talking to various different people who are kind of in my social circle and some are my clients and things like this, and we were discussing this point a little bit lately. And so this is really about the idea of protection and sort of the contagion that can happen. So the inspiration for this is that Liechtenstein recently was in the press because there was a bunch of Liechtenstein foundations, and they happened to have beneficiaries or settlors, etc., associated with them who, I guess it's technically not settlors when you're talking about a foundation, but anyway, same point. Those people were Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, etc. And because of kind of some of the sanction stuff, even if they had nothing, in often cases, they weren't born there, they didn't have anything to do with those places, etc., they were basically fired as clients. And this created a whole host of problems with things in the Caribbean, with BVI, with Cayman, which a bunch of these areas, and it has been quite problematic for those people. And the truth is that we don't know what the future will hold. There's a lot of potential scenarios that could unfold geopolitically, in terms of sort of just what happens domestically politically, in terms of what happens with potentially natural disasters, economies, industries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's a large different set of possibilities, especially as you kind of fast forward out into time, right? And therefore, how do you deal with this? Well, you should deal with it mainly through developing some optionality, okay? But optionality itself is not sufficient. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the structural way of thinking about this as we go forward. So before we do that though, welcome. I am Michael. If you are new here, this is Offshore Citizen. We are international corporate structuring, tax, banking, etc. experts. So we help you to figure out whether you're in your home country or you're wanting to relocate, how to set up the best global architecture for yourself. This might include residencies, citizenships, corporations, trusts, banking, etc. There's kind of a heavy leaning into tax optimization, but it can be a bunch of others. That is an area that we have particular expertise in that most people don't have. So kind of we're able to assist there, but also looking at that from a very practical standpoint of, what does that mean for your operations? How do you consider banking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if those are things that are interesting to you, you can send us a message through offshorecitizen.net. Happy to kind of help you go through that process and figure out what is the best solution for you. Or you can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. Okay, so I want to talk about the concept of what I call stovepiping, okay? And the idea here is essentially that you can have diversification in your assets, but there can be contagion within one area to another. So this thing with the Liechtenstein foundations is a great example of this. You might be like, oh, great, I'm going to have banking in the Caribbean, and I'm going to have assets in Singapore, and I'm going to have assets in the US, and I'm going to have, whatever. But it's all under this Liechtenstein foundation. Well, that's not so great. That's quite bad in this situation. So what you generally want to do is you generally want to think about this. This is like, the more wealth you have, the more you should be thinking in this way. You should essentially develop these stovepipes, essentially structures that have no interconnection between each other. And then what that does is if something goes wrong in one of them, you have these others as backups. Now, hopefully, obviously, there isn't, and you should try and choose those locations, choose those structures to minimize these problems. But it is certainly an issue. You should have a situation where you can somehow easily get rid of fiduciaries if that's necessary in order to step in case that becomes some sort of a concern for you. You should definitely have banking that is separated not just by jurisdiction, but also by the institution that you're talking about. You should probably have separation to some extent by currency. You should have assets in sort of I was going to say self-sovereign, but maybe that's like a little bit of a strong term, self-reliant legal structures, so that, let's use a simple example. If you had a Hong Kong company that was held in a Liechtenstein foundation, you would have problems because you have Liechtenstein. But if you have Hong Kong dealing with Hong Kong, well, then you don't have that same problem because Hong Kong wasn't the issue, right? And this goes kind of around the world. Now, what are some places that you should be looking at? Places that I would be considering. So certainly Singapore, certainly Switzerland, certainly the US, certainly UAE. I'll circle back to UAE in a second. Probably Hong Kong, quite possibly South Korea. Those are probably the major 6. Yeah, you could throw in like, some of these are like a little bit fungible. You say, okay, well, maybe Switzerland, I can look at something on the halo of there. There's Luxembourg, there's Channel Islands. You've got something like Andorra, Liechtenstein, etc. Yeah, you've got like something in there. You can maybe look at something in the Caribbean. Cayman Islands is like practically the only game in town when you're talking about the Caribbean. Depends a little bit when you're talking about assets as well, or you're talking about like owning real estate. How does that work? But let's just kind of go through these quickly. So from the standpoint of large amounts of money, in most scenarios, not being meaningfully at risk in the institutions that you're talking about. So the institutions are quite sophisticated, and the system that they're a part of provides a fair degree of stability. Switzerland, Singapore, the US tend to stand out, okay? A lot of people are kind of anti the US. You should not mostly be anti the US. The US has a wonderful ability to print money. And if you sort of think about it this way, the senators and congressmen can essentially vote for unlimited bailouts. Where are they personally banking? Where are their family and friends banking? Do you think they will allow that institution to go under and they will take the loss, or do you think they'll vote to print and bail it out? They will vote to print and bail it out all day, every day, to the end of time. So sort of these systemically important institutions, you're very unlikely to lose your money from some sort of like a financial collapse in those places, okay? Very, very unlikely. Does that mean that there aren't other problems? No, you can of course have other problems. As we were mentioning, there could be some sort of a war somewhere. There could be some sort of a geopolitical thing that happens, and that could be a concern for you. Okay, great. So this is why we want to diversify to some other areas. So it is a good litmus test. Who was it who went along with the sort of, former developed West's order with respect to Russia? Well, notably, UAE did not. Now, the thing about UAE is the degree of sophistication of the financial institutions in UAE is not up to the standard of Singapore, Switzerland, the US. It's just not. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have any presence there. Doesn't mean you shouldn't diversify to there. There's lots of value in that. But you should just be aware that it is simply not at the same caliber yet. They're improving, that's good, but just kind of be aware that puts some limitations and parameters on there. Hong Kong, another one. Now, Hong Kong actually is more kind of historically sophisticated because it was a main center of trade for a very long time between China and the US in particular, but the rest of the world in general. This being said, obviously there are some concerns in the relationship with China and Hong Kong. So I would never put all my eggs in that basket. But when I hear people come and say, so for example, the Ray Dalio kind of approach is set up family offices in the US, in Singapore, in UAE. Okay, that's the kind of 3 places that he has sort of gone for. And the idea is don't cross-contaminate between them. The issue is Singapore is fairly close to the US in that sort of set of alliances. So the likelihood, it's not that non-correlated. UAE, a little bit less correlated than Singapore, actually. So, is it worth considering both? Yeah, if you have sufficient wealth, it is worth considering both. You probably should do that. And you should probably get a golden visa in UAE because it's a pretty easy thing to get and it's very easy to maintain. And so if you're sufficiently well established, it's a nice kind of backup. Do you have to live there? No, not necessarily. It's totally up to you. But it's a pretty easy option to have, and you should have one. The next thing is South Korea. South Korea, I've talked a lot about over the years. Nobody takes me up on it. It's like very interesting. But if you look at sort of global rankings in the safety of banks, what you'll find is that after Singapore, there is South Korea in Asia. It is a pretty well-run place. It is also sort of its own deal. It is also super productive, like very productive. you sort of kind of look at this place and you got 50 million people. It's relatively small geography, but they're one of the leaders in vehicles. They're one of the leaders in shipbuilding. They're one of the leaders in electronics. They're one of the leaders in movies. They're one of the leaders in music. They're one of the leaders in skincare. They're one of the leaders in magic. Like, this is an amazing part of the world. Amazing. And so what does that mean? What that means is they actually produce real stuff, and that gives them sort of a different position relative to a country that is not so necessary. Now, is it totally unrelated? No, of course it's not totally unrelated. I mean, there's obviously a border with North Korea, and so there's military considerations there. And so, would I put all my eggs into the South Korea basket? Absolutely not. South Korea also has exchange controls, so the won is like a bit of an issue. So, this is why I kind of say, all right, you kind of got the big three, and then you've got these sort of other silos that you might say, okay, like, let me diversify a little bit over here. The thing about it is that the cost of diversification is very low. And so the way that you should generally think about these things, in my opinion, is you should think of it as insurance, okay? What does the insurance cost you? And when you think about the cost of insurance, you have to think about, what am I protecting, right? If I'm protecting $100,000, well, then I can spend very little on insurance. If I'm protecting $100 million, I'm going to spend a lot on insurance, right? It turns out that the cost of insurance of, say, setting up banking and things like that in some of these places is very low, very, very low. So you shouldn't worry about that. Citizenships are something that are a little bit, more involved for most people. There's some trade-offs in that regard in a few different ways, but it is something to consider. Is there places in Latin America? Mostly Latin American institutions, et cetera, are concerning. So I think, like, if you're talking about some place like Panama, Panama is probably widely considered to be one of the better places from the standpoint of things like banking. Uruguay would be maybe another contender, and they're still not that good. They're just not that good. Is it something? Yeah, it's something. You can keep it in mind, but you should think from the standpoint of having these sort of silos, and like, what kind of an edifice can you build? Can I connect some sort of residency, maybe citizenship, but at least residency, some sort of banking infrastructure, some sort of legal structure, some sort of asset base around that pillar, and set up a variety of these things. And obviously you want high quality, right? So I think one of the problems is that diversification is sometimes diversification. You don't want diversification. So you have to kind of be able to select for high quality. Turns out that in, for example, the US, Switzerland, Singapore thing, you're pretty solid in terms of not diversifying in those cases. And so you get some benefit. It's even better if you can throw some of these others in there. I'll leave it at that, but this is sort of the general mindset, okay? Think about stovepiping, segregating your assets so that if something happens that might affect one of those pipes, it doesn't affect the other pipes. Try and make them self-contained. Don't kind of cross them over between each other. You can have similar assets in various cases. For example, you could have a brokerage account in each, and those brokerage accounts could buy similar stocks, right? You can do that sort of thing. But you definitely want to have enough segregation that if something were to go wrong, you are protected. And if you want help with that, please reach out to us, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.